So today we're here to tell you a story. It's the story of Standout and the user experience that we have developed with this application. Just for a quick reference, how many of you know what Standout is? Raise your hand. Excellent. Okay, so we'll let you know what the product actually is and does in just a little bit. Also have a question. Is anybody wearing a Standout t-shirt in here? Okay. Yeah? No? Okay. All right, great. So we're going to tell you the story today. Let me just quickly introduce who we are standing up here on stage. Obviously, we got three presenters. My name is Nick Pedersen, and I'm a product designer and also an avid Nordic skier. And we also have up on stage Stuart Mayhew, who is our senior multimedia designer, as well as a avid bagpiper.
Wearing trousers today.
And over here on my right, we have Jonathan Lansing, who is a multimedia software engineer, and he is also an avid musician. So that's who we are. We all work for a company called Electric Rain. We are a software company in Boulder, Colorado, and we are most popularly known for our product line, the Swift 3D product line, which started out as a 3D to Flash tool. And we've been around for about 8 years producing that product, but we also have some new products that we're developing related to WPF and to Silverlight. So Swift 3D actually has evolved to be a great tool, but it also now exports to Silverlight. So if any of you have needs for 3D to Silverlight, that's a product you want to investigate. XAM 3D is actually a 3D tool that exports to WPF, so native 3D. Some of the cool rendering engine stuff that they have in WPF. So those are some of our existing products. Today we're going to be talking about a new product called Standout that we've been developing for quite some time. Let's just address why you're here. We probably have some designers, some developers, maybe some business people in the group. But in general, my premise is that all of you like to build cool stuff that works. Okay? We also enjoy building cool stuff that works. And our goal today is just to have a conversation with you about the last 5 years of our lives in building Standout. So hopefully that's why you're here. If you're not here for that, you're welcome to leave. I won't take it personally. So session goals, we're going to kind of just briefly go through the long and winding road that we've taken to Standout. We're going to point out some things that worked for us and also some things that we really just got wrong. We've been at this for 5 years, so we've made plenty of good decisions and also plenty of bad ones. So we're hopefully kind of share those with you so that you can have more successful application development process for yourselves. So with that, let's talk about building cool stuff that works. Really, if we want to use the analogy of building a house, there's essentially 3 major steps that we've established along the way that work for us. Workflow, design, and build. I'm going to be presenting to you on workflow. Stuart's going to be covering design, and Jonathan is going to be covering build. But the whole idea is that, again, using the analogy of building a house, workflow is really the foundation, the layout, the floor plan of your application. And it's really critical to address that first, establishing what is it that the people who are owning this house, what are they going to need? What sort of room layout is most appropriate for them? How are they going to navigate through their house? Moving on to the design process, what is this application going to look like? What is it going to feel like? Where are we going to put the furniture? Where are people going to be interacting with their environment? And then finally, the build process. How are we actually going to craft this application and put it together in the right way so that it actually is functional as well as beautiful? So these 3 stages are sort of what we've established as very critical steps along the path to building a successful application. So jumping into the workflow section, first we have to figure out who is our homeowner, okay? Who's going to be using this application. We have to figure out what are they going to be using the house for? What are their goals? What's their end result? And then finally, what sort of foundation can we build underneath these people to most successfully get them to enjoy that house and have a successful life in that house or in our case, our application. So our process in establishing a workflow began with, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, just a couple of inspirational quotes here. People aren't passionate about things they suck at. Okay, I don't know if any of you know Kathy Sierra, but she's a great blogger and talks a lot about user experience. And to me, this really is true. If people are enjoying themselves using your application, they're going to be good at it. Okay? And they tend to lose interest if they don't enjoy working within your application. So if you want to set your user up for success, you want to try and instill a sense of passion within them. And unbelievably so, you can actually do so now with WPF because there are some new horizons that we can explore in the area of design. And the end goal to me is how can we help our users kick ass? I mean, plain and simple, that's what we're all about, helping them succeed. So with that, where we started in establishing the workflow was research. We spent about 5 years ago, we spent probably a good full 2 years researching the presentation marketplace. So let me just explain. Standout is software that allows you to build rich media presentations, much like the one that you've been experiencing so far. So you'll be seeing the output here for a while as we present, and a little bit later I'll jump in and give you a quick interface tour. So we researched presentations, we researched the marketplace, and we tried to figure out where are our users now and where do we need to get them to. So we also had to figure out an approach. Okay? We knew what they wanted. They wanted better presentations. Currently they were using PowerPoint, Keynote, slideshow software, and we knew that there are people out there that want to do better than that. They don't want to deliver slideshows, they want to deliver true rich media presentations. So what is our approach? For us personally, we figured out that it starts with design. It starts with unbelievable, very cool, highly impactful, rich media communication design. So basically, we established our workflow based on the fact that the user is going to see something that they like. They see great design and they say, I want that. I want that to be my presentation. So with that workflow established, we needed to figure out a way for them to first choose the context of their presentation, then be able to make it their own, to customize it without having that design break down. So this was our approach. There are many approaches to developing a workflow, but for us this was the sort of the principle that we started with. So getting from A to B, this is how can we help our users kick ass? So they're going to start out in one place, and in this case, they may not be kicking as much ass as they want. So they may be frustrated with slideshow software. They may not be delivering content or delivering design that they know is representative of their content. They may be a little bit embarrassed about their presentation and the way it looks on screen. So really, the goal here is how do we get them to become superheroes, rock stars, whatever it may be. How do we help them achieve that goal of having great-looking visuals up on the presentation screen as they're delivering their presentation? So I'm going to jump into a couple of demos. The first one here is one that was built a long, long, long time ago. When we were first developing this application, we were looking more at traditional development, C++, possibly using a little bit of Flash. But I did my first prototype in Visual Basic. And I'm not a technical guy, but I was able to just kind of pick it up and put some buttons here and there, and basically begin to establish what our application is going to feel like. So I'm just going to quickly show you what the result of that was. And the whole idea here is the ability to use prototypes is a really effective way to figure out what works and what doesn't. And it doesn't take an engineer to build prototypes. So again, not technical person, picked up some Visual Basic, enough to be able to create a general workflow of, okay, I'm going to come in, I have a bunch of different options. I'm going to choose Create New Presentation. This is where the workflow begins. I want to choose the design context that I feel is most appropriate for my presentation. So I can kind of click around, select these things. I see something that I like. I can go ahead and jump in and say, okay, that's the one I want to begin editing. I move over here, and now I can begin to jump in. We started looking at sort of different formats for outline, integrating text and media. We've obviously got a preview over here. I can set up some tabs. This is all stuff that non-designers, because I'm also not an actual graphic designer, non-designers and non-developers can do on their own. You'll notice that this prototype is just butt ugly, right? So it's old school, it's just traditional gunmetal gray, it's not pretty, okay? When you're establishing workflow, things though don't have to be pretty to be able to begin to sort of test things out. So this was a visual basic prototype that we put together, or that I put together. And again, this was early on. So we began to continue moving through this workflow process and establishing what it is we want our users to be able to do. So we really took a step back from the presentation market, and we figured out that people were too quickly going into the stage and beginning to edit their slides or edit their content. So we actually wanted to address the problem holistically. How do we get them actually to lead up to that point and be able to establish appropriate and good quality content? So through our research, writing white papers, attending presentations, seminars, things like that, we established this concept called the core workflow. So core stands for collect, organize, refine, and express. So the whole idea is giving people a tool that they can collect their presentation assets, lots of them, in one place. Then allowing them to organize that content into logical chunks. Being able to refine that content down to just what do I need to put on the screen for my audience to get the visuals that connects to what I'm saying. And then finally, the visual expression of that content. And that's, for us, the design context, or sort of the visuals that you see delivering my material up here. So this core workflow served as the platform for us to begin building our application on top of. And once we established that workflow, we began to continue prototyping, and this time I whipped up a Flash prototype. Again, this was a new learning curve. I jumped into Flash, and I was able to learn enough to sort of put together what we'll see next. So again, design, it's starting to get a little bit better because I'm in Flash. I can have a little bit more control. But again, I'm not a graphic designer, so it's nothing super pretty to look at. But I'll just sort of take you through some of the steps that we built in here. You'll see some similarities to what we saw before, where we're picking a design kit. We've got some options with our design. We can go through and actually kind of look at some different color schemes, some different background options. So this is our design kit selector, aspect ratio, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into the organizer. Okay, so looking back at that workflow of core, collect, organize, refine, and express, within here, this is what we called well, at this point, it wasn't called anything. It was more just a big whiteboard or blank space that you could dump content into. So I can go ahead and add, and this is all pretty much a pre-scripted workflow. I don't actually have a lot of functional UI here, but what it was is it was setting the stage so that I can turn around and present to our team, this is what I'm thinking we should build, okay? Because it's one thing to explain, but it's another thing to actually see some stuff in action. So I can go ahead and add some content here, and I'm just going to drop in some diagrams and some notes. And you can see I'm beginning to collect a lot of different types of content into one area. I can open up my gallery, drag some content into here. Okay. Now, once I've dumped my content in, I've collected it, now I can actually begin to organize it. So we developed this container system where I can actually group content together. I can create hierarchies. I can, and I may go wrong here because, as I said, this was pretty pre-scripted, and this was about 3.5 years ago when I built this. So there are certain things that work and certain things that don't. But the whole idea is that we're creating this sort of, we called it a corral system, where we can create logical chunks of content. So I, as a presenter, can begin to structure my presentation. Once I've actually done some of that work, I can begin moving over into the actual presentation. So over here, I believe, I should be able to drop some stuff in here, and I'm not sure how much of this is functional. Let's see, does this go in here? Yeah, okay. I'm remembering all this, a trip down memory lane. So I'm starting to build out now a linear process or a linear order for my content. Once I'm happy with that, I can jump over into more of my traditional presentation editing interface. So over here, we've got some different views. Whoops, back to there. We've got some different views where we can either look at just the text or we can look at actual containers, okay? And you'll see some of the organizational stuff that we did earlier is now carried over into my outline. Again, we've got some different tabs over here. So not radically different to what we saw in the Visual Basic prototype, but now we're moving into actually working around this core workflow and building some tools, or at least thinking about some tools that might facilitate helping the presenter actually organize their content prior to building out the presentation itself. So that was a Flash prototype that we'll make go away here. And I think that will bring us right back to the end of my section of the talk, where we're going to look at what was working for us, or what worked for us up to this point. So the number one, I think the principle of helping your user kick ass is a very sound one. It's something that we should all be striving for. I think making a strong commitment to R&D, our company actually paid me to go and do all this crazy prototyping and research and stuff like that, and let me run with the concept of Standout and it's really established this core workflow. So it was a big commitment we made financially. And also the idea of rapid prototyping, putting these together with whatever tools that you have, whether it's Visual Basic, Flash, now we have Blend. There's all sorts of great prototyping tools now, but it really helps to be able to push buttons and work through and actually visually see what your ideas might be to begin to establish a really solid workflow. Some things that didn't work. So what did we do? Well, stop dreaming and start building. We probably dreamed a little bit too long. Probably spent a little bit more time in the prototyping conceptualization. Eventually, you need a guy like Stuart and a guy like Stuart and a guy like Jonathan to jump in and actually building real stuff. And we probably spent a little bit too much time in the R&D phase. And then finally, identify the needs of all users. We spent a lot of time working on the workflow for the presenter. Probably didn't spend enough time establishing a good workflow for the designer, who is the second half of our equation. So that was one thing that I think it was an oversight on our part. So that's what worked. That's what didn't work on the workflow side of things. So now I'm going to hand it over to Stuart, who's going to talk about design.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Obviously, if I wore my kilt, maybe you might recognize me a little bit easier, huh? So, on my side of the world, if I give you a little background of how I got into Electric Rain, I'm originally a multimedia designer. Studied graphic design at college, and basically I applied for a job at Electric Rain, and it just so happened they were very interested in me. And when I arrived, I found out they had this application idea, and that's kind of what Nick was expressing there with his Visual Basic mock-ups and stuff. So I was sat down in a room and I was shown this application. It was a wonderful diagramming process for getting into like understanding what they were trying to build. And then at that point, as you saw, at that point they'd got as far as Flash. It was around about the time that the WPF had come onto the scene, and so we started looking at that, and I couldn't really understand, still at this point, really what my role is in this environment. I mean, obviously I knew Flash. I didn't really get how Flash was going to fit into an application environment. But at this point, we began to watch videos, demo videos by Microsoft on WPF. The kind of things we were seeing were, this image here is representing Minority Report, where these incredible UI experiences with 3D, moving things around with fingers, and wonderful demonstrations. And at that point, I began to see the gel between what I knew as a multimedia designer and what Electric Rain were looking for in their application. Was a really nice kind of high level of motion and graphics to bring out more of what Standout needed to be for the audience that we were going to target it towards. So if I move forward. So there I was presented with this problem. I had my, my multimedia experience, and then I began to dream off into WPF. So one of the things that in order for you to understand the workflow of a designer, I mean, I'm talking more to the audience of who aren't designers. I mean, designers have their own workflows, but this is mine in particular, is the first thing you have to realize is there's no such thing as original ideas. I mean, often what will happen is an idea will morph itself into the needs of that device or that, in this case, application. So I already knew that with my multimedia experience, I was going to be pulling a lot of what I already knew and having to bring it over into an application environment. So obviously there are some challenges that were around that, with the fact that I had website experience, but how was I going to bring some of that over into application design? So the first thing that obviously was standing out to me, pardon the pun, about the application was that it was a presentation environment. So first thing that I began to do was brainstorm the concept of how do presenters think about presentations? Well, I know that when I think about presentation, and from the research that Electric Rain had already done, that presentations are not these static things. They're things that are dynamically happening in the real world. So I began to do a lot more research into whiteboarding, the idea of how people would actually apply in the real world whiteboard concepts, how they would lay out post-it notes, start organizing and collecting based on the core workflow that had been established, this whole idea of how would someone do that in the real world. Obviously, there are websites out there that show a little bit of this kind of effect going on. There's already multimedia that exists that shows these kind of effects. So sorry, I'm still trying to get used to using this new thing. So then we took it forward and we said, right, well, how could we apply this in a digital realm? I began to prototype out from a designer standpoint how things might scale off the stage. As you can see here in the I guess that would be your top left, things scaling off the stage, and like maybe written post-it notes, how UI could appear within this environment, remembering that, of course, being a digital place, it doesn't have to be quite so static as you would expect with a traditional whiteboard. You don't have to have erasers and things like this. You think differently in that respect. So again, I'm just kind of very briefly taking you through kind of how we went through that initial process of understanding what the application would need to be, and then basing it on a real-world model. So if I now move forward. So I have a demo, yes, let me get into this. So here's kind of where I took what Nick had done as far as Flash, and my tool of preference for mocking up conceptually very quickly stuff is Illustrator. So
hey, Stuart, can I add that looks a lot better than
yeah,
what I had?
I mean, obviously the first thing I had to do was add a little bit of a lick of paint to it. I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but I had to get more of a feeling of the ambience of what the application might look like. So here would be the first stage of the workflow, and this is the collecting stage. So I began to think, well, you're probably going to have a gallery. You're going to have this kind of environment of the whiteboard that you'd seen in the mock-ups that Nick had done. But now I want to take it like a few steps further and maybe get some of that working. So obviously, if I just take you backwards and forwards so you can see what's changed, basically what's happened is somebody has grabbed something out of the gallery and brought it over into the environment, and you've seen that it's added a chart off to the side there, the right-hand side. And at the same time, you're seeing some new UI appearing and a kind of a folder structure to help you get to the second stage, which would hopefully be the organizing. So the whiteboard environment that we were trying to create, we wanted to have maybe a central theme, and things would start to organize around those central themes. So then the next stage would be, well, the refine part. Well, now you have your organization in your kind of mind map here, then you're going to grab these things and you're going to want to drop them over onto a little panel down here. So things would fade back. Again, often it's hard to express to someone verbally as well as with animation. And you'll see later how I took it to the next level to then bring more of a multimedia feel to some of this. So at this point then you've selected an object and you want to add it, and we've got like little cues appearing in the thing. I mean, these are all things that you have to think about from an application side, but it also starts from me as a designer, tangentially me thinking about, well, what's a good way for that to possibly animate? I mean, obviously this is not expressing the animation, but I'm already beginning to think in terms of more of a multimedia experience. So I just want to check that that was the last one. So at this point, you'll notice over on the side here, on the right-hand side for you, that there's kind of a layers palette. Now, obviously, again, talking back to the thing that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you know, it's traditional to have toolbars that are layered like this, and certainly our system would need some kind of layering system. I already knew that. So I pulled off what I already knew. And then I began to think further, which is the step that a designer would take, into WPF. So I'd seen the great demos using 3D. Obviously, the first thing that I thought of as well, I love 3D. I wanted to get into that 3D world. And I was thinking there might be a really nice way that we can show layering to a user to navigate through our application. So at first I did a 2D mock of this, and I began to think maybe the application could be broken up into its various pieces, and maybe the user would like to navigate up and down through this application with some 2D, some 3D. Maybe that would help better express, in a more multimedia sense, how you're moving in and out of your application. So again, I'm going to close this down and come over to a very quick... so this video, which I just want to make sure I pause it before it goes too fast. This video was like the next additional step. Again, as a multimedia designer, it's often very hard to express to a team who are development background or more kind of, you know, document specification background, like how you imagine something to move and work. So this video, which I'll play now, is basically an expression where I went into Flash and After Effects and just did some little effects where I want to show how this UI might work, how you saw how the interface went from 2D to 3D, how we can grab a layer of the application and reorder our application. The application may be part of a bigger system, and then again it can flip back to 2D. So I'll just let that run one more time, just so you can see that one more time. Again, just showing the slicing effect. And again, it's where I'm bringing my traditional background of multimedia and thinking beyond the traditional 2D layer that you see on the side. Now, one of the things that was interesting about that was that we actually found that the 3D, as beautiful as it was also, it was, to some people who are not used to seeing, obviously applications at this point don't do too much 3D, it can be very confusing, a very demanding environment for someone to get used to. And as it goes, we ended up going back to using a 2D layering system. So one of the other things to bear in mind is there are two sides to application development. One was the functionality. That was something we looked into 3D. We used multimedia for the functionality of the application. The other thing that we wanted to use multimedia for, and the power of some of that, is for the looks. Obviously, this here is a car that will get you from A to B. That's the functionality of the car. But the form of the car is you take it to that next level to give the user that highlighted experience of wanting to get into that car, wanting to drive it fast, and wanting to be involved in the culture that surrounds the corporation that made that. So we too wanted to bring some of that experience that I had in multimedia into the environment of Standout. Oops. Let me see if I can just get back there.
Control.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, so again, now we're talking about multimedia in sense of styling. So we're talking about the pure aesthetic of the application. So again, one of the things I would do, and you can see that even the way I work here is very much in tune with the whiteboarding experience, is we went out and, or I went out and discovered imagery that I thought would be most evocative in the application. Things like the nice, the chroming of perfume bottles. I mean, that's a pure aesthetic. I mean, it has no other value to the product inside than the fact it tries to draw you in and raise your attention within the store that it might be presented in. So here you can see very many examples where they spend a lot of time in industrial design building these things so that it'll have the eye-catching effect to you. So then of course, there's the other side of aesthetics, which is there are beautiful practical devices. This is now blending the pure aesthetic with the form again, where we're pulling out the beautiful appeal of good-looking buttons. The iPhone is a classic example of something that looks incredibly beautiful that people desire, but it has a functionality behind it as well. So here you can see where we've got the glowing effect on buttons because you might be viewing it at night, that kind of thing. It has a function, but it has also a certain beauty to it. And then there you can see where we started to then take some of this beauty and apply it to some UI kind of mock-ups again at this point where again, aesthetic can add also some functionality where here the matte background compared to the shiny background will help you better define differences between what might be clickable, what isn't clickable. Certainly buttons are going to stand out better when they're more attractive in the interface than a standard grey bar or something like this. So again, it's just an example of where form and function can work together very nicely, and you have to make that careful balance between the two. So moving forward again, so I really wanted to go on to Jonathan's stuff, which would be great to see, so I don't want to spend too much time repeating myself. What worked? Basically, the greatest part was when I first got in, the brainstorming. I mean, it's fantastic to be able to now take some of my multimedia experience and apply that now to application development. I mean, websites have certainly shown what is possible. I mean, there's a lot of great effects out on the web, and now we can pull a lot of that experience that we've learned about how users like to interact with websites and pull that into the application environment. I think that's a great thing. Using established metaphors, the basic idea there is that you can have buttons and things, but by using the metaphor of beyond the button, in other words, you know, if that button was to flip and maybe more like a playing card deck or something like this, you can build new experiences around new metaphors. I mean, again, you don't have to go and look for anything brand new. You can often take an existing idea and translate that into something else. And finally, form follows function. Again, being a designer, it's great to be in a position where I can build something in, say, Expression Blend and apply all that beauty and attention to detail that I want to do, and then ultimately it's still a button. It's going to get over into the functional side and get all that nice code behind it to establish the application. What things didn't work? Obviously, when you're going through the brainstorming process, is that there has to be a cost applied to what you want to do. I mean, 3D was certainly something we were very excited by. It was something that we wanted to follow up further. But the ultimate thing is that 3D takes more time to manage. It takes more time to develop. Edits are a lot harder. And 3D is going to have a bigger cost to us. So hence, 2D was a much more appealing realization to us once we got deeper into it. Designer and developer handoff. I mean, one of the workflows we have at Electric Rain is that I will design the work and then give that over to a developer such as Jonathan, and he'll do all that great code behind the scenes. But we still have a little bit of resistance getting that back into my hands. Often the application is many, many parts, and the fear that developers always have on me is that I'll delete a button that has a whole bunch of functionality applied to it, and I didn't know that. I mean, there's no obvious side. I mean, I don't go deep into the code. I'm very much at the surface level. I'm at the high end of Blend and XAML, and so I don't know what's going on necessarily behind the scenes to know that there's a lot of attachments to that. So there is still certainly walls and resistances between the designer-developer handoff. And then the final point I wanted to make was that obviously we're driven by a world of style and then great-looking things that have a lot of design applied to them. But in the world of applications, the thing that we learned was that you shouldn't polish that off too soon. It's better to actually get the functionality in there much sooner and apply very simple form and then build on that form much later, because it's not unusual to have a user request or some kind of application alteration that actually may just blow off completely all the design you've just applied to something. So at that point, I would like to hand it back to Nick.
So, thanks, Stuart. We've been talking about this application Standout for quite some time now, and you've been seeing the output or the end result of what Standout is capable of, and we're currently using our own tool to deliver this presentation. I think it's quite obvious that this hasn't been a PowerPoint. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of the interface and a quick tour around to show you some of the features that we've been talking about sort of leading up to through the workflow and the design process. And we're going to point out a couple of aspects of the application that Jonathan is then going to delve into and show a little bit more of a technical demo of how some of the things that how we're doing some of the things. So I'm just escaping out of full screen mode, and this is the Standout user interface. There's actually two interfaces that come with this version of the application. One is for the designer to work and build sort of the design context of Standout. The other is for the presenter. We've specifically been talking about the workflow and the design around the presenter edition. So that's the one I'm going to show you here. So you'll see as I kind of scroll through on the left side, and if you look back at some of the mock-ups and some of the early VB and Flash prototypes, you recognize that this is what we call our outline. It doesn't look like some of the other stuff because it sort of has evolved into a true multimedia outline. So these are the different sections of the presentation that you've just been experiencing. And you'll see that it works a lot like a traditional outline where we have this idea of hierarchy where I can actually build out a structure and organize my presentation content much more logically. So as I click through on who we are and you see the different pictures and the different job titles, we still have this concept of introduction still at the top. And the interesting thing about this is that this is really just a tree control that we started out with, that WPF offers us, and we just styled the heck out of it, and we build extra functionality in there, and now we've got multimedia, we have text, preview thumbnails, we have the actual media itself over here. But the whole idea is that WPF offers a lot of capabilities out of the box. It's just a matter of you developing and converting those controls into what works for your application. So over here, this is the outline. This is the stage right here where you can do kind of simple previews. We have a media gallery down here, things like that. More traditional layout. We talked about some of the crazy concepts of the 3D and the layering and all that stuff. But we ended up kind of scaling back, number one, just for usability purposes, but number two, also performance issues. Even though WPF, back in 2005, and when it was called Avalon, they were really selling the dream of you can do anything you want now with application development. As we began digging in, the performance was just not there, so we did have to scale back. But I think it's probably for good reason also because the usability, I think, was improved. But if you remember, we started talking about this core workflow. So there's still some innovative UI, not that this all isn't working very well for us too, but you'll see if I double-click here and unlock these toolbars, that there's a window or an environment behind here, okay? So I'm going to, again, double-click on this background, and you'll see some animation happening. And basically what we're doing is we're opening up those toolbars into the world that we call Flypaper. Okay? Flypaper was just a code name that we came up for this big, gigantic digital bulletin board back when we were doing our earlier mocks and prototypes. And so now it's basically our UI, Flypaper. And the whole idea is that Flypaper is a really big, almost infinite. The developers tell me it's not truly infinite, but I don't really understand that. But it's a gigantic canvas that I can pan and zoom and move around. And you'll see that there's content on here already. So the whole idea is that you can add content to Flypaper. Okay, so I can drop in media. I can also begin to group this media together, okay, into logical chunks. This is that corral system that we saw early on, way back in like 2002 when we started brainstorming this idea. We can create sequences of content. We can add text. We can begin to develop almost mini outlines. So jump in and start typing here. I hit return. I can tab. I can shift tab. I can change the hierarchy of this content. I can begin to associate media and text together and begin developing these sort of small chunks of information that I know they go together and it's stuff that I want to present. The whole time that I'm doing this and working with Flypaper, you'll see that the toolbars are still here. And they're there for a reason, because they're actually active. So as I roll over this, I actually get sort of a better preview of it. If I click and drag, it actually becomes consistently active. And the whole idea is that we're able to drag content from one spot to the next. Okay, so we've just moved a piece of content from Flypaper into the outline. And this is really based on this core workflow, is the final step is expressing it visually. Once I put it in the outline, now you'll see that the stage has updated that image. Okay? I want to show you a couple other features of Flypaper. The first was this ability to sort of open and close the toolbars. We also recognized that navigation was important. So the zooming just happens with a simple mouse wheel scroll, much like you're interacting with like a Google map. Panning is click and drag. But we also recognized things like being able to select everything, but also being able to find stuff on Flypaper. Because really, the whole idea is you can dump a ton of material in here, but then you have to go through the process of actually finding it. So we provided tools that allow you to quickly navigate through the content to be able to find what it is you're looking for. So was that everything we needed to demo in terms of Flypaper? Sorry, because Jonathan is actually going to be doing some demos, so I want to make sure I set him up properly.
I think that's a good amount.
Great. So again, I'm just going to kind of jump back into the main interface. This presentation isn't about like go rah rah stand out. It's a great application, I think, but really we're kind of here to talk to you about how we built it. So we're happy to talk to you offline, about the application and what it does and things like that. But for now, I'm actually just going to jump back into the presentation and let Jonathan pick up from the build.
All right, so how many developers do we have in here, actually? Okay, majority, and WPF developers specifically, or Silverlight? Okay, smaller. All right, so when we went to build this application, obviously there was a lot of work that had already gone into it, lots of workflow ideas and design and actual prototypes, which is great. One of the things that we'll be talking about is how the monolithic spec was really not an appropriate thing for this application. And so everything that we build with these tools and materials, we just kind of look towards the design and workflow that had already been set up to make the vast majority of our decisions. And as a developer at Electric Rain, you're kind of in an interesting position because you also get to act as product designer since you get to make some of these decisions. And that's really where the craftsmanship comes into of my role at Electric Rain. So as Nick said, we're going to dive in here to some demos. I'll just do a little bit of code, nothing too in-depth. First thing that we're going to talk about is this unveiling of Flypaper content and how that simple animation is a really powerful mechanism for telling the user that they've certainly entered a different mode of thinking, different mode of our application. And the second thing that we'll be talking about is some of these simple navigation tools that were really easy to implement in WPF. And that is where we'll switch over here. So here I have a simple standout project open that shows just one Flypaper container. It's not as impressive as the other one. But here we have these toolbars that you can scale up and mess around with. And so when you double click on Flypaper, that's when they recede. And you'll notice that we use an animation between the two. So how we did that, and here's my debug side of it. How we did that basically, can you guys see that in the back all right, the text? Good. All right. So really what we do is when they scale down like that, we have a handler that comes in here and it goes and finds a storyboard from our resources. And if you're familiar with WPF, you should be familiar with this. But basically, this storyboard is something that's defined in XAML that's been brought in from Blend or something like that. And we just grab that storyboard and run it. It's really as simple as that. And this is an example of how little code it takes to actually to get this to occur. And now one of the things that we did when we ran that down was we stored the previous state information of where these toolbars were. So that allows us then, when we come back in here, we come now into a different section of code. I don't want to get too detailed into this, but basically what we can do here is get a storyboard and then actually manipulate it in real time. So you'll look here, we have a double animation using keyframes. And this allows you to set up a series of keyframes that will animate a property over time based on your choosing. And what we can do is set actually our target value to what we had it set to before. And so this is something that I like to call just a dynamic animation. It's something that you can generate on the fly and run, and it conveys this message that the designer wants to convey to the user very effectively, just a few lines of code. So you can see that brought it back up. So the second thing I quickly want to go over is a little bit of navigation. So on here, I don't know if you guys attended the session the other day about the adaptive user interface, but one of the more interesting things I thought that he brought up was when you use a mouse wheel to zoom, there's kind of two paradigms. You're either coming from the standpoint of looking through a camera, or you're coming from the standpoint of holding a piece of paper. And depending on which line of thinking you come from, the mouse wheel can represent either of those two things. In our application, we've chosen that you're coming through the standpoint of a camera. So basically, as you mouse wheel, here, let me show it here first. As you mouse wheel in, you zoom in, and when you pull back, you come back. And this is, again, very easy to do in WPF. Oh, no. Well, I won't go into the code since the application doesn't seem to be responding right now. What's that? Oh, thanks. All right. So as we come into here, basically what you do is you want to use whatever the current mouse position is to zoom into and focus on that. So it's really simple to do in WPF. In your mouse handlers, you can just grab the position based on whatever UI element you're interacting with and store that. And then you apply your zoom, however the amount that you want. In this case, I think, we're increasing it by 0.1. This is some just bounds checking here. This method applies the transform to the actual, to our fly paper, essentially zooming it up. And then what you have to do after that, this is one of the kind of quirky things with WPF. Basically, if you grab the mouse position again after you've applied the scale, you can see how far the fly paper is actually translated, because when you apply a scale, it'll kind of just do it based off of its center point instead of the mouse. So once you grab that new point, then you can apply the correct translate back onto fly paper, and that's how we solved that problem. And then real quickly, the last thing I want to show is this fly paper finder. So in here, one of the nice things about WPF, it's visual brush. This is a really nice way for us as a developer to just show what you're looking at. We can start relying less on naming of in this case containers, and rely just more on the raw visuals. That way the user knows what they're looking for and they can see it right away in this fly paper finder. Basically, when you click that, this is another example of that dynamic animation that I was mentioning before, where you can calculate the bounding box of this object here and just kind of frame it using very simple animations, much like we did this. So that's the extent of the technical demos for now that I will show. Let's flip back to the presentation. So moving forward, so I want to get back to this idea of the monolithic spec. And this is a document that defines, from front to end, exactly what a developer is going to actually be creating. And
Jonathan, if I could jump in, back in 2000, I think it was 4, we actually wrote one of these monolithic specs. And as you can imagine, it's pretty much got thrown in the trash can a long time ago, because it was just ridiculous for us to think that far ahead when you're developing an application that's sort of breaking into some new territory, both on the UI side and the whole concept side, is that we really found that it was too difficult to actually see from A to B, like from where we were to what the application was going to be like in the end. So we did spend a lot of time developing this monolithic spec, but as Jonathan points out, it didn't serve us very well.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to rely on these other kind of things like these prototypes and messages that the team is wanting to convey in this application. And so if you have this big, scary monolithic spec, really it's not gonna provide you with a whole lot when you're trying to be innovative and actually usable in an application, because the bottom line is that until you get in there and start developing it and breaking all the pieces apart, you're going to be able to solve a lot of the simple problems on your own, I believe, as a developer using WPF and some of these newer technologies. And really it's about breaking those apart and finding the pieces that you actually need a little bit more guidance on and focusing more on mini specs. So oftentimes our workflow will be, from a developer and a product designer standpoint, is we'll have basically a one-sentence explanation of what we're developing, maybe a prototype, some screenshots, something like that. We go in and start developing just right away, and we'll run into an area where we need a little bit more clarification, and at that point, we'll actually hand it back to the product designer to fulfill a mini spec, as we say, and then it becomes a little bit more of a traditional developer workflow from that standpoint. And we found that works extremely well, and it's very efficient in developing these newer and innovative applications. So that's kind of the end of my section for now. I'll do a quick overview of what worked. And one of the biggest things is having developers that also like to moonlight as product designers. They like to make these decisions. They're good at it. And that's a really efficient way of creating applications and rapid prototyping things. And also iterative development cycles. With WPF, since it's so easy to get stuff up and running so quickly, it's almost, again, getting back to this monolithic spec, it's almost making it a bit obsolete in some of these scenarios. And there's lots of iteration that happens in an application like this. There's iteration between developers, there's iteration between developers and product designers, and there's also iteration between developers and designers. And WPF is a good catalyst for having all that work. And also having a small and very expert team working on this. We have a great team back at E-Rain, and I think that's one of the best things to help us out, not having a huge team. And the fact that we're small also allows us to be a little bit more agile. So if we need a new feature right away, for Stu or whatever, we can just huddle up and get it done relatively quickly. So some of the things that didn't work, again, this monolithic spec, it's practically thrown out the door from the first line of code. Could have focused a little bit more on usability testing. The biggest thing with a lot of these prototypes or brainstorming sessions is it's very easy to come up with cool stuff. It's a little bit harder to come up with usable stuff. And really the only way to prove that is to put it in front of somebody and be like, okay, does this make sense? Do you know what's going on? And then also listening a bit more to the voice of reason. This is again coming back down to more performance issues, and 3D usability issues. With WPF, at least version 1, the performance just hasn't been there yet. And I'll speak to that a little bit more here in a second. So moving forward, we want to talk about WPF and Blend and the relationship between designers and developers just a bit more. Looking to new horizons, we have a lot of opportunities with Silverlight and WPF to really enhance user experience and create new and interesting user experiences. And I think we're in an interesting time right now where we're going to see a lot of stuff that looks cool and doesn't work, and vice versa. And hopefully we'll start approaching a good middle ground. So again, I want to come back to WPF. It's actually our player. So if you look at a typical Flash presentation, the playback mechanism is actually Flash itself. And much like that, we use WPF as our player. So all this that you're seeing here is just WPF. That's all it is. One of the things about WPF is, and our application specifically, is since our output is WPF and our application is written in WPF, they both live under kind of the same performance container. So if we went too overboard, those of you that are familiar with WPF, bitmap effects has been one of the biggest downsides that looks cool and is just not performing at all. So if we went crazy with bitmap effects in our user interface or 3D, these kinds of things, all of a sudden we start realizing that a multimedia designer, as they're designing a presentation in our application, they're actually paying the cost because they're trying to do something cool, but they can't do it because WPF is only so big, and it's spending too much time rendering our user interface. So we've run into a lot of problems with that, and that's actually one of the biggest things that has brought our UI kind of back to a more normal ground. One other note on that is these authoring tools like Blend that are coming out, they don't quite have this huge application in mind yet, in my opinion. It's certainly on its way, but for Stu to go in and design a full, control or something like that, he might use, he could layer a bunch of panels and canvases and that kind of stuff. And the only reason it's done that is just because that's how he's drawn it. But when I go in and look at it as a developer, I see tons of extra objects in there that's going to hit performance, right? So I have to go in and kind of clean that up and optimize it. So one of the workflows that's actually worked best for us is a combination of raw XAML coming in from Stu and also lots of JPEGs, Adobe Illustrator files, and that kind of thing. And we'll re-implement it from scratch in XAML just so that we can make it as performant as possible so that he doesn't have to worry about, what doesn't work well and what does work well. So with that, we're going to hop over real quick to one more demo. And this is getting back to the good part of WPF, which is that it does do 3D and it does do these cool things. So from our presentations, let me get this closed here. So when somebody goes to create one of these templates for our solution, the workflow kind of starts in Blend. Before I do show you that real quick, I want to show you this SOP that I whipped up this morning with my awesome design skills. So what you'll see here is we've got what we call a component in this center area right here, and it's a 3D carousel. This was developed by one of our developers back home. And we did a very early version of this a while ago, and it was extremely scripted, extremely hard-coded into being one specific thing. But we found over and over again that that's what people were drawn to when they saw these presentations, because it's cool, it's flashy, and somewhat reasonable to convey, some kind of message. Especially we have some clicking functionality in here, so I can click one of these things, and I'll kind of bring it up to front if you want to emphasize a certain topic. But the really cool part about this is that you can actually edit this in Blend. A designer can take this component that we've developed, and they can actually go in and edit some of the properties. They can put this gradient on the background, or they can create extra animations that they want to run in here and integrate into the standout presentation. So I'm just briefly going to show you what that looks like in Blend. All right. So here's what it looks like in Blend. And we've got some properties on our carousel here that you can expose in WPF using dependency properties, for those of you that are familiar with that. So the designer can come in here and they can see what this is going to look like with more or less content. And they can start to kind of create their animations and backgrounds, to accept a wide range of content, because that's really what our system is all about. And we've got some other properties here where they can change the angles of the 3D objects or the speed of the animation and that kind of thing. And I have pretty sweet animation that I created beforehand. that targets one of the objects, the camera actually inside here. It just simply rotates it upside down. So this is an example of just a simple animation that a designer can come in here and create. And in Standout, just don't want to scare anybody away. Here's a quick peek at our designer edition. But in Standout, I can actually, this is that storyboard that I just saw. And so you can see that I've applied that to my design template. And then finally end up back here. And when I preview this, I can see my animation get run. So that's kind of a quick glimpse at our workflow, but this was more kind of to show just some of the power that a designer can use in WPF and how it gets all the way through to a presenter to help get their message across. So with that, I'm going to flip back to the presentation. I believe I'm handing this back to Nick.
I think so. Sweet. So thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Nice job. Just kind of to jump back into what we were showing before with this 3D carousel component, I think the whole point here is to emphasize the fact that new things can happen when two guys like this get together and start to begin using Blend as sort of a combined design/development environment. Obviously, that was the whole goal of Blend, but we're finding actually opportunities to dig in and really say Stuart wants to be able to style and customize that 3D carousel, but he can't build it from scratch because it's a very code-heavy sort of piece of equipment. But Stuart can now communicate to Jonathan and say, this is what I need to be able to touch in that 3D carousel. And Jonathan, or in this case it was another developer of ours, Ted, just spent a fair amount of time getting in there and actually creating this component that can now be very customized by Stuart and any other designer that jumps into Standout and wants to integrate or use their own version of the 3D component. So anyway, it's just cool new opportunities that we see as Blend, not just in terms of application design, but in terms of true rich media development, whether it's for Silverlight, WPF, but not just thinking about toolbars, but really as multimedia delivery systems that WPF offers. So Standout itself, just a quick plug for the product. Again, we didn't focus too much on the product itself and what it does, but it is it's in beta right now. It's a designer-presenter combination solution that allows designers to build rich media templates like the one that you've been experiencing, and allows presenters, somebody like myself, an average business presenter that doesn't have a lot of design skill, just to be able to customize the content within the presentation itself. So it is in beta. You can check out our website and come and download it and begin to test it and use it and whatever else you want to do with it. You could also use it to present your own content if you're in the need. Contact information, obviously we're all in the same boat here. We enjoy building cool things that work. So if you have any specific questions for any three of us on any one of our specific areas, please feel free to contact us. And then finally, we'll open it up to any Q&A if anybody has any questions.
So, 5 years is quite a long time frame and a very expensive time frame for producing a product. If you were starting from scratch today with none of the research, nothing else, but with the tools and the technology available today, would it still take you 5 years to produce Standout? No, definitely not. So one thing is that we were literally on the bleeding edge of WPF and Expression Blend back when it was Sparkle. We were hand coding XAML, Stuart and I, to kind of put together early prototypes. It was very time intensive, and that was because the technology was really, not there. Another thing was the performance and some of the pitfalls that we ran into when we sort of took the blinders off and said we can do anything we want. Now we know what we can't do based on what WPF offers us as far as performance.
And there also was a first iteration that was being developed in Flash and C++. Okay. So the 5 years includes from concept to what you see today. The last 2 years, 2+ years.
Yeah, I think about
has
2.5
been WPF
years of
development.
active development when we put together the team. Now, at that time, they were also learning WPF, for the first time. So they were going through the learning curve as we were developing the application. But yeah, it's been about 2.5 years of active development. I would say with the knowledge that these guys have now, and the knowledge of the pitfalls and things that didn't work for us, probably shave a year off of that. So
Yeah, I'd be
that kind of
confident
gives you
shaving a
some
year off of that.
context.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, you bet.